Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. Shaka Sally, the man himself, is back. Welcome back, Shaka.
Thank you very much, Paul Ndiho.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too, the kid from Nyakajeme.
Man, it's been a while, eh?
It's been quite some time. Don't really have to go very much into it, but I was somewhat medically and environmentally challenged.
Very good to see you. A warm welcome to you, all our Facebook followers are watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a show that comes to you every Tuesday, and today we'll be taking your questions. But before we take your questions, let's maybe talk a little bit about what's happening right here in the United States. We are going through another election, the midterm elections. There's a lot of excitement out there. Shaka, your thoughts?
You know, these do not really look like the usual midterm elections because not so much activity really when you have midterm elections. You always tend to think that if you have an incumbent president occupying 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and he's also in control of the houses of Congress, and the economy is doing very well, you almost think there should really be no problem. It should be business as usual. But you can't believe what's happening right now. It looks like, yes, some of the public opinion polls which have been conducted suggest that 68% of Americans believe that the economy is doing terrific. It's doing so well. But despite that, guess what? Only 38% believe that the country is on the right track. And when you look at the enthusiasm, the interest level, especially on the side of the Democratic Party, you cannot believe it. There is always, talk about how young people do not actually think in terms of voting and what have you. They are politically apathetic. But guess what? When we look at some of the early returns, the early voting so far, you're talking about records actually being broken. We're looking at the neighborhood of about 32 million people so far, nationwide, who actually have participated in the early voting. And there are some indications that suggest that a majority of those happen to be leaning toward the Democratic Party. I'm talking the changing demographics. The young people, the people of color and all that kind of stuff, they seem to be on the verge of actually making a huge difference. Well,
Shaka, 2 years ago we had a similar situation where the enthusiasm was very high, especially among Democrats. You had also Republicans wanting to bring in President Trump. What we missed out last time was the simple fact that all the polls were off.
It's not only
could it be the same issue this time around?
Not really. I beg to disagree with you. Yes, the enthusiasm may have been high and the interest and what have you, but it was not exactly like what we're experiencing now. What you had at the time was something rather unfortunate for Hillary Rodham Clinton. There was not a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of interest on the part of her party. The Democratic Party, especially the young people and the people of color, they were not very much interested, really, not very much enthusiastic about getting the vote out for her, just in the same way they had actually done that 4 years earlier for another, Democratic Party stalwart, Barack Hussein Obama. So it's a totally different ballgame right now.
What's at stake? What's at stake in this election here?
What's at stake, of course, is that whichever party wins really has an opportunity to shape the political future of this great nation, the United States of America. There's no question about it. But it is also quite possible that we are actually going to see what the founding fathers really thought about. It was part of their vision that you need, for democracy to work, you need what they call checks and balances. You have a president who represents one party on the one hand, and then you should also perhaps have the other party controlling Capitol Hill, the houses of Congress. We're talking about the House of Representatives and the Senate. And also you look at the nation, you look at the governors and what have you. There is quite a very interesting election, in fact, this time around, because Barack Hussein Obama himself has actually said this is perhaps the most important election in recent American history.
The only difference is that he's not on the ballot.
He's not on the ballot, but in a way he is actually, because guess what? He's been actually going around the country, going to strategic, states that seem to be on the verge of probably tilting towards, the Democratic Party. For example, historically, you tend to think that when you go to the southern part of the United States, and you look at a state like Georgia, for example, you look at a state like Texas and all kind of stuff, you think of them as traditionally red states, states that belong really to the Republican Party. But the last time I checked, they no longer seem to look like sure red states. They, in fact, increasingly begin to look like pink toss-ups. They could actually end up on the other side.
But Shaka, let's face it, you gave very good examples for both Georgia and Texas. The last time I checked, I don't think we've seen any Democrat win in Georgia or Texas in a very long time. For example, we have Stacey Abrams, who is running for governor. What is the likelihood that she will actually maybe celebrate tonight?
Well, we obviously don't know. The jury is still out, and especially because, let's face it, whatever numbers at the end of the day come out, you can be sure, unlike a lot of elections in Africa, you can be sure that those numbers are reflections of the will of the people who actually voted, not the will of the people who counted the votes, or the individuals who actually announced the results of those type of elections. I think that when you go to Georgia, there could very well be an opportunity for history to be made. First of all, she is not only a woman, she is also a black woman. Very capable, by the way. And it looks like when you look at early voting, for example, it looks like the interest that we talked about earlier, the enthusiasm that we talked about earlier, seems to be somehow adding value. There could very well be an upset in Georgia. I'm not in a position to predict because I am not a prophet, but there could very well be an upset. In fact, if there was an upset in Georgia, I wouldn't be surprised. If there was an upset, for example, in Florida itself, I wouldn't be surprised.
That's another perfect example. Before we go to Florida, let's go back to Stacey Abrams. Yesterday I was watching a clip where he was making her final arguments. She said, don't vote for me because I'm black, don't vote for me because I'm a woman, don't vote for me because I'm a Democrat, vote for me because I'm better. Is that a message that resonates with people across the country or even in the state of Georgia?
Well, you can't obviously look at that message in isolation. You also have to look at other factors. For example, how has she, in fact, been doing, especially in terms of hitting the issues that people look at as bread and butter? Mind you, this election is being characterized in two ways. On the one hand, there are people who say the Republican Party, in fact, seems to have accomplished the business of running on, essentially, on a message of fear, because we are hitting immigration and what have you. And yet, ironically, most of the people that are, American citizens really, in one way or another, they are connected to, guess what? Immigration. In fact, the First Lady of the United States of America is a recent immigrant, really, Melania, from Europe to the United States. So she's a symbol of immigration. The issue of immigration, we're talking about the caravans and what have you, the issue doesn't seem to be drawing traction. As much as, for example, the issue of health care. The issue of health care is drawing a lot of traction. And could very well, it could very well actually make a huge difference. Because let's face it, the last time I checked, the Trump administration wanted pretty much to repeal the Obamacare, or what is, generally known as the Obamacare. And it failed, obviously, largely because of a key vote by, unfortunately, the late Senator John McCain.
How about the issue of race? Obviously, in some states, for example, again in Georgia, we know for sure that Georgia is a very, very conservative state, and they have had their own share of race relations. What role does race play in this election, considering the fact that Stacey Abrams is a black woman?
Well, we really don't know until, of course, we see the results. But during the campaigns, there have been accusations, for example, that the Republican Party, and especially the man at the Republican Party helm, we're talking about President Donald Trump, there have been accusations that he seems to, in a sense, be a racist. I have not seen specific or incontrovertible evidence to suggest that he's a racist, but there has been that kind of talk. But it seems to me really that what is important right now is not so much race, is not so much culture, is not so much gender. It is about the issues of bread and butter. So it is about really jobs, and it's about health care, especially health care.
We have a comment from Uche Biafra. He wants you to talk about midterms in the U.S. They're happening right now as we speak, and all we know is that our votes don't count. Those in power go to a secret room and choose whoever they want. What do you think, Shaka? I think in this particular context he's referring maybe to the Electoral College, but we are not using the Electoral College now. These are just general elections.
Well, Uche, to a certain degree, has a point, especially when you think about the fact that there is evidence, incontrovertible evidence, of what is called vote suppression. We're talking about some of the states which are controlled by some Republican governors, reportedly require that people, when they come to vote, they also must have an ID with a photograph. And this seems to, for the most part, affect people of color, minorities especially, black, Hispanic, that kind of stuff, and young people, and people of low income. But about the business of counting the votes, or going into some kind of rooms and making deals and stuff like that, that no longer really is part of the United States of America. America has gone far beyond that, Uche. We could probably talk about the issue of, again, vote suppression, yes. And in some cases, in fact, it has been dealt with. For example, there was evidence of that in Georgia, the state of Georgia, which you characterized as a conservative state. And the good thing about this country, again, there are checks and balances. You have an independent judiciary. And so you had a judge, in fact, ruling in favor of some of these people, in fact, going to vote, you know, and that kind of stuff. So, yes, there are some problems. The United States electoral system is not perfect, but it works.
How about people who argue, for example, that in the state of Georgia, again, I don't know why we are focusing on the state of Georgia, but it's a perfect example, the current Secretary of State or the current governor, the current Secretary of State for the state of Georgia.
To be a candidate.
Yes, he happens to be the candidate. He's the guy who controls the voting process and the voting machines, whatever you want to call it. So if you are to compare and contrast maybe to leaders on the African continents who control the process, what would you say about the outcome if things turn out to be different than what we expect? What would you say about that? I
would definitely say that that is very un-American, very, very unusual, and you could quite, I think, comfortably compare it with some countries on the African continent, which obviously are very democratically challenged, especially when it comes to the issue that you call electoral justice. There are places, for example, like the country you and I come from. You have a president, for example, incumbent President Yoweri Museveni. He is the man who actually appoints, chooses and appoints members of his electoral commission. And yet, he is also the same individual who actually is running in an election, which ends up really by, you know, at least some critics would call it, it ends up being a selection. that kind of stuff. So if in fact that is true, as it seems to be in the case of Georgia, that is very un-American.
Let's cross over to the southern part of Georgia. Let's stay in Florida. Let's go to Florida. We also have a very interesting candidate, Andrew Gillum, very, very articulate, very remarkable in so many different ways. What does he bring to the table that could be at stake in the Floridian election?
Again, I think that really the voters have a choice. They have a choice based on the issues, the kind of issues that that particular individual you have mentioned is running on, and the kind of issues that his opponent is running on. It is also very uniquely very historical if, for example, the people of Florida would elect an African American for the first time in the history of the state of Florida to become the chief executive of that great sunshine state.
Let's go to another comment, Wako Joel. Shaka, please allow me to ask, what will the midterm elections have an impact on the political, social, and economic landscape of Africa?
Of course they could. If, for example, you do have, at the end of the day, a divided government, meaning that, of course, we do know that President Donald Trump is essentially at the head of the Republican Party. And so we could actually reasonably say that it is the Republican Party which is in government, controls the government, so therefore sets U.S. foreign policy that obviously affects Africa one way or the other. If, on the other hand, you have the Democratic Party regaining Capitol Hill, meaning regaining the House of Representatives and also the Senate, it could also affect the manner in which the man in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Donald Trump, operates when it comes to foreign policy towards Africa. That is, of course, if there are more democratic legislators on Capitol Hill who look at Africa differently from, or look at it in a manner that is a different social, cultural, political lens in terms of U.S.-Africa relations than, of course, incumbent President Donald Trump looks at it. So it could make a very big difference for that matter.
Somebody is asking a question here. Who is good for Africa? Is it Democrats or is it Republicans? Maybe I can also tie into a comment here from Nambilirwa Amina. Democrats are more likely to be voted in big numbers than Republicans. Why?
Well, first of all, they are running on the issues of bread and butter, which I talked about. They're running on jobs. They are also running on the key thing, really, healthcare. This is a country, to be honest with you, that needs essentially to embrace what a lot of, civilized and industrial nations around the world embrace. In those countries, unlike the United States, when it comes to the issue of healthcare, it is a right, not a privilege. And therefore, I think that the Democrats are on the right issue right here, because universal care is the way to go. Whereas, of course, the Republican Party, for the most part, they have looked at the issue as an issue of privilege, not an issue, not a right issue, not an issue that an American citizen is entitled to, but rather that you must have at least some money in your bank account in order for you to afford getting sick.
A reminder that you are watching Shaka Extra Time. Shaka Sali himself is back. I guess that's why we're getting a lot of comments. People want to know your thoughts. Let's go to another comment here. Let's go to love. We are doing dirty politics in Africa, and our leaders don't love the countries they represent, but they love their party and their self. Your thoughts?
I don't know really whether those leaders that we are talking about love their party. At least I can agree that for the most part, when you look at it, all indications suggest that those particular leaders that are democratically challenged, first and foremost, they are patriotic to their stomachs, the stomachs of their families and friends, not society, not country. It's as if, in fact, at the end of the day, the country is transformed into a personal real estate, or a personal farm for that matter. And we don't have checks and balances. We need checks and balances. We need leaders who have to account for their actions. We need leaders who have to know that they are not the bosses, because the bosses, in fact, are the people who put them in office. And we also need laws that are adhered to, laws that bring about electoral justice, to the extent that the same people that elect some of the individuals to take up office could also be the same people who have the power, for example, to recall those particular individuals who, at least according to them, are not performing the way they are supposed or expected to do.
Let's go to another comment. Biggs Alozias Bijirwa. A great job, Ndugu Shaka. What do you have to say about the senators on both sides of the aisle working with African leaders in ways that demean Africa? Can you really say that that any party in the US cares about Africa?
I think that I cannot say, obviously, that when it comes to the issue of care, we should really generalize it and look at it in the context or through the political parties here in the United States. But the question that I would like to put to, Ndugu Aloysius Bijirwa, and he's probably, in fact, Saint Aloysius Bijirwa. Where I come from, that particular name is referred to as Rosillo. You know, if that is the guy, I'd like to inform him that first and foremost, it should be the African leaders, really, who should care about their people and Africa for that matter. That is the only way, at the end of the day, they can get a very good deal from some of these senators on Capitol Hill here in Washington, D.C., where, of course, as you know, Paul, some of the decisions that affect all of us globally are made. So at the end of the day, do African countries have leaders sincerely who care about their own people? Or, as we said earlier, most of the so-called leaders in Africa tend to specialize in caring about their own stomachs, the stomachs of their families, the stomachs of their friends, and not society. I think the answer lies in Africa. We talk about a lot, Africa is poor. Africa has never been poor. On the contrary, Africa has in fact helped to build some of these incredible economies, these countries that are considered to be very, very rich, very technologically advanced. We talk about the United States. Look at the descendants of Africa who have been here for centuries and the kind of contributions they have made. Look at China, the latest kid on the block. China is capable or able to do the sort of things because guess where it is actually getting the raw materials? It's getting them from Africa, from poor Africa. Does that really make Africa poor? Africa has a leadership deficit or leadership deficit. It needs leaders who can organize it, who can manage the resources for the benefit of their own people.
Let's go to another comment. Babu Brandon. What is bringing African nations back is selfishness. So Shaka, what do you think it's the way out so that Africa can make a step and take out this kind of leadership? And Brendan is in Kilimanjaro.
Brendan, of course, if he's in Kilimanjaro, you know, he's almost standing on top of a mountain that is the highest or the tallest on the African continent. Brendan, I think really what is needed, sincerely, is fundamental changes in the attitudes and mindsets of the average African individual, the average African person. And also the challenge, frankly, is up to the changing demographics. The new people, the young people. I think the young people are more exposed than any other previous generations. And I think it is high time that the young people actually took up that particular challenge and translated it into providing Africa the dignity that it deserves. Africa, again, as I said earlier, is not poor. It is arguably the wealthiest continent. Unfortunately, it has the largest share of people who you can categorize as poor people. And the reason they are poor is not because they cannot do better, they can. But in order for that to happen, they need a leadership that is dedicated and committed to the advancement, the development of the African person. They need a leadership that can restore the African dignity. And I think it is a challenge, frankly, to the changing demographics, and the changing demographics in tandem with social media. I think it has the ability, the capability, and the potential to turn Africa around. Mind you, when I was growing up, I am very, very disappointed to note that I used to be told that Africa consumes what it does not produce and produces what it does not consume. I mean, how long are we going to talk the talk? It's a high time that you have specific individuals who can no longer just talk the talk, but actually walk that talk so that Africans can begin to walk the walk. Because let's face it, I've had presidents, for example, talking about adding value. How long can you just talk about adding value without, in fact, not doing it?
Shaka, we're almost running out of time. What are you guys talking about on Straight Talk Africa tomorrow?
Tomorrow, the story is about the midterm elections, and of course, we will be having the guest host, the Matoke man from Kisii, Kenya, Vincent Macaulay. He will be the man in that hot seat, and he will bring you the results, and he will tell you why the American people chose what they chose.
Very briefly, people want to know why you're out for a while.
I told you a little bit earlier that I was both medically and environmentally challenged, and so I was sort of moving in a sort of orbit that was environmentally and medically unfriendly. And for that, I should like to take this opportunity, for example, to thank all those people, frankly, who had me in their thoughts, who prayed for me. Those people, for example, who made telephone calls for me while I was in hospital and all that kind of stuff. People who sent incredible, beautiful cards. And again, the people that stopped by to see me where I was. But I'm glad that I am back. And hey, let's face it, my friend, this is today.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, Shaka Sally. It was good to have you back in studio here. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Until then, I want to wish you all the best. So long from Washington. And of course, I look forward to the elections tonight.
Thank you very much, Ndiho, and I hope you cast a vote.
Yeah. Any predictions?
I'm not in the business really of predicting, but I wouldn't be surprised, frankly, if it ended up as a sort of political electoral earthquake in favor of the Democratic Party.
We can't wait to see that. Yeah, I'm not betting any money on it this time around. Yeah, thank you.
You're most welcome.